All right, so we've got a lot to cover today in a short period of time. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started, and hopefully folks can continue to trickle in. Just a note, this is being recorded, and so we will share this out after the call. My name is Cindy Woods, and I serve as National Policy Counsel with Americans for Immigrant Justice. And today it's my privilege to moderate this webinar on the new Family Expedited Removal Management, or FERM, process. FERM was announced in early May, along with a slew of other policy changes impacting asylum seekers at the southern border. A brief outline of the process: family units who enter without inspection are being placed in expedited removal proceedings and then released under alternatives to detention, which includes a GPS angle monitor. Under expedited removal, as some of you may know, individuals who fear return to their home country are referred to the asylum office for a credible fear interview, in which they must demonstrate a significant possibility of establishing eligibility for asylum in order to then be referred to full removal proceedings and have the opportunity to defensively seek asylum. So in FERM, these CFIs are occurring at local USCIS offices, often within days of an individual's release from CBP custody. So this whole process, from release to CFI to potential immigration judge review, and if necessary, the completion of the removal order, is all to occur within 30 days, which is a really short timeline that, as established, is extremely challenging, given especially the unique needs of families and recent changes in law, including the asylum ban. A quick shout out to the East Bay team. Congrats to them on the new ruling. I know there's a stay right now, but hopefully there will be some big changes soon in relation to that asylum ban. So AI Justice has stood up a project aimed at providing legal orientation and representation to families enrolled in FERM. And today we've got a great panel of individuals from our team to speak firsthand about our experiences over the past 6 weeks. So first, we'll hear from Shaylin Fluharty, our Executive Director, who will discuss the FERM process in the greater context of the processing of families seeking asylum, the specifics of the FERM program, and how it fails to take into account the unique vulnerabilities that families carry. Then we'll hear from Jovita Salas, managing attorney of our asylum project, who's going to dive into what our team has seen over the past 6 weeks serving clients in FERM, focusing on general trends that she's seeing. And lastly, we'll hear from Angela Bouliakis Andronis, who's the director of our pro bono program, who will discuss our pro bono service model, the various opportunities to engage with this critical work, and the impact that it has in supporting asylum-seeking families. So that's a lot to cover in a short time, and I'd like to start us off very quickly with 2 questions. The first question that you can answer on your screen is if you have ever encountered a family that has been enrolled in FERM. And the second question is, if so, where did you meet them? Was it along the border and perhaps in a welcoming center or a border shelter? Was it in transit at a transit city, or was it in a FERM city? They're listed there. Tell us in the chat if you select that, which city they were in, so we can just kind of get a sense of who's with us today. All right, I'll just ask Deborah to go ahead and close that so we can see the results. Okay, so it looks like out of 53 respondents, 9 of you have encountered a family enrolled in FERM. 1 of you encountered them along the border, 7 of you in a FERM city, and most of you have selected other, which I guess the answer for that would be you're the ones that have not met with someone in FERM. In the chat, it looks like we've got 1 person that's met a family in Denver. And that's all we have. So it looks like the majority of you have not been in contact yet with a family in this position, but hopefully over the next 45 minutes or so, we can provide some clear insights into the program and its impacts on families. As questions do come up for folks during the webinar, please place them in the Q&A function. The chat box, I believe, is also open for folks to have other observations or things they want to share, but for questions that you'd like to have answered today, please place them in the Q&A box. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Shay to share some of her unique insights into the needs of families in the FERM process.
Thank you, Cindy. I should probably start by saying that my journey or experience with FERM actually started as a journey in family detention. Prior to doing this work, I had the honor of working with families who were detained in the largest ICE detention facility at that time in Dilley, Texas. And it was in that work that I learned lots of lessons that have really shaded my reflections on the FERM process in this moment. So, when I was on the ground in Dilley, I was not yet a mother. And I had a really clear sense of the urgency of the legal needs that our families faced. I knew that but for having a successful interview with the asylum office, the families that I met in Dilley would not reunite with their families and secure the safety that they were hoping for, but instead be immediately deported back to where they came from. And so as we received families every day in that setting, I was narrowly focused on their legal needs. And one of the things that the families almost always wanted to talk about had nothing to do with their legal needs at all. I remember that it was, every single day, multiple times a day, that parents would say something like, the formula here that they're offering me is not formula that my baby can drink. I think they're starving. And I would spend lots of hours coaching our volunteers and our staff to help our clients understand that the only thing they should be focused on in that moment was getting through their credible fear interview process. Now that I'm a mom, I really understand in a more detailed way how something like having food that your child can drink so critically impacts your ability to secure status in the United States and safety, because it impacts your ability to participate in the process and have a process that's fair. Another question that families would often ask, usually after they obtained a positive outcome in their credible fear interview process, was when they were going to be released. And families would ask all day, every day, when am I going to get out of here? I'm supposed to be released from detention. How long is it going to take? And when we would ask, why are you so worried? What's going on? They would almost always say, my child is sick. My child is so sick, his nose is running, he can't stop coughing, I'm worried about him. And again, these were things that often we would say, you're going to be released soon. Those needs will be addressed in the future. But what I realized over time is that those are needs that exist in detention, and that steps away from detention, no matter what those steps are steps in the right direction. I'll never forget one of our 1-year-old clients who passed away shortly after their time in detention in Dilley because they didn't have access to that critical medical care that they needed. And it's these stories and so many others that have really kind of led me to believe that FERM, although not perfect and certainly challenging, is a step away from detention and therefore a step in the right direction. I wanted to talk first and foremost about the speed of the process, which is really fast, and I would say maybe faster than people think. So Cindy had given an overview of the process being a sort of 30-day timeline, meaning that when families are released from Border Patrol custody or DHS custody on day one, that the entirety of their process, including removal, if that's the end of the process, would happen within a 30-day timeline. But it's really the very beginning of the process, that day 1 through 5, that can feel so incredibly fast. So under the government's timeline, during days 1 through 5, a family is released from custody. They're enrolled in alternatives to detention. They're fitted for an ankle monitor. They're issued their SmartLink telephone. They travel to their destination city. They meet in person with ISAP and their BI case manager. They might even meet with their deportation officer or ICE. And all of that is happening between day 1 and 5. They're also, of course, arriving to a place that's unknown to them, moving into a home that's strange to them, and trying to adjust with their children. And so what this means is that by the time we get to day 6, right, day 6 is the day that interviews should start. So under the government's timeline, between day 6 and day 12, a family should participate in their credible fear interview process. And between day 13 and day 20, a family should be issued their positive decision if they're issued a positive credible fear determination, or their negative decision. And what we're seeing is that from the issuance of that decision, if a family has been issued a negative decision, their immigration judge review hearing is scheduled between 1 and 2 business days after the service of that detention, such that removal can occur between day 21 and 30. So I'd like to tell you a story of actually my first, the first family that I worked with in FERM, and I'm going to call the mom Sarai. And Sarai was released from the border in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas with her toddler on a Wednesday. Wednesday was day 1. On day 2, on Thursday, Sarai and her child traveled all the way to Baltimore, arriving on day 3, which was a Friday, where they spent the entire day meeting with ISAP and going to the ICE office. We received a phone call from Sarai that evening, Friday evening, I think it was about 7 p.m., learning, well, actually, we didn't really know what the circumstances were for Sarai. She was explaining that she had an appointment on Monday at 8 a.m., but we didn't really know what the appointment was for because she didn't know and couldn't explain it. So she took pictures on her cell phone on her bed, one by one, all of the papers that were in her possession. And we were able to confirm that indeed at 8 a.m. on Monday, which was day 6, she was scheduled for a credible fear interview. For Sarai, who was located in the suburb of Baltimore, that meant that by 8 a.m. and actually earlier, 7:30, she needed to be in Arlington, which was more than an hour and a half away, to participate in her asylum interview. So you can see how fast that pace would be for a family like Sarai and her child who were arriving to an unknown location and hadn't had a chance to take a breath. In response to these fast-paced needs, we set up a hotline where families can call, and it's our goal to try to orient them to the process and to the greatest extent possible to provide them with representation during their credible fear interview process. And we've learned through this work a few key things that I wanted to share with you. So the first is that the human experience of migration uniquely exacerbates the speed of this process for families. Travel to a destination city doesn't always go as expected. For some of our families, it takes multiple days. And I'll tell you a story of a mom who actually believed that her son, who she was going to reside with, lived in Baltimore, but she accidentally gave ICE the wrong destination address. And so as she was working to depart to go to Baltimore, she learned that her son was actually now living in Iowa. But that didn't deter this particular family, who actually arrived to Iowa and then bought a new flight to travel to the asylum office one day later so that they could be present at their credible fear interview. But travel is burdensome and exhausting for these families. There's other realities of just being a parent and moving to a new place. Finding a place that your child can sleep, buying a bed or buying a crib, identifying food that you can have in the household that will meet the needs of your family, seeking medical care, especially when you're sick, and the complexities, the human complexities of reuniting with a loved one who might be a stranger. For example, a father who is meeting their child who has just arrived for the very first time, or even residing with somebody who's a stranger to you, perhaps a distant relative or a friend of a family member who has agreed to receive you, but with whom you may have no relationship at all. And these complexities make all of the realities of FERM really difficult, like transportation from a suburb of Baltimore to Arlington, Virginia at 5 a.m. in the morning so that you're not late for your interview. We've also learned, perhaps unsurprisingly, that the process is incredibly confusing for families. Families have a hard time understanding the cast of characters with whom they must meet regularly, people who they must meet at different offices, including DI case managers and deportation officers, asylum officers, in some circumstances, immigration judges, and others who might even come to their home to check in on them or take pictures of them or call them to ensure that they are in fact at home during curfew. We've also learned that the sea change of this new process, a process that's so different than every other asylum procedure that we've had in the United States, can increase the confusion that families face. You know, we've worked with some families who were quite sophisticated in understanding the laws in the United States because they were residing with somebody who was a family member who applied for asylum and won asylum. And so as they're learning from their trusted individuals who have gone through this process, how different this process is can sometimes increase someone's distrust of the system and distrust of the information that they're receiving. And this has led us to conclude that rapport building, especially in this process, working with families, is incredibly essential to helping them understand what they're obligated to do, but also that they're safe telling their story in this process to people who hope they can help them and not hurt them. We've also seen firsthand that consultation is extraordinarily difficult and time intensive for families on such an expedited timeline, and particularly during these last 6 weeks when the circumvention of lawful pathways bar has continued to be in effect. You know, I shared some stories about trying to get access to the paperwork that our clients have quickly so that we could help them understand their circumstances and their interviews and their appointments with various government officials. But we've also had to navigate lots of other things in order to help families. For example, the client that I mentioned who called us on a Friday evening with an 8 a.m. interview was residing with her mother. And her mother unfortunately worked all day Saturday and all day Sunday, but was able to be home to share her phone so that I could communicate with Sarai at 6 p.m. at night. So you can quickly see how some of these logistics, like having access to a telephone in order to make a phone call, can create real impediments to families in this process. The other two things that have been challenging are helping families identify a time when they can have confidential space away from their other family members, including their children, to tell some of their deepest and most challenging circumstances and secrets, perhaps, those really intimate moments of past persecution or torture that are so critical to their claim, without having to disclose that information to others with whom they reside. And of course, childcare. For those of you who have toddlers like me, you can appreciate how difficult it might be to have your child in another room without you, perhaps for hours while you're talking with a lawyer. We've also seen that these cases are really time consuming, not only because in addition to thinking through or helping a family understand how to articulate their past experiences of persecution and torture, but also all of the other exemptions or compelling circumstances that might help them navigate their way through the circumvention of lawful pathways rule. For us, what this has meant has been talking with families, with mothers and with fathers, with children directly about not just their harm in their home country, but experiences of human trafficking that could have happened at any juncture in their life, the dangers that they faced in Mexico and how those impacted their inability to present at a port of entry or their need for urgent medical care. Each of these narratives and stories can take hours to understand and unpack with a family, and it's extraordinarily difficult for families to relive those moments in such a quick timeline without taking a moment to pause and catch their breath. We've also seen that the asylum interviews are extremely grueling for these families. You know, our data shows that the interviews are lasting between up to 6.5 hours in some circumstances, and that number does not capture the amount of time that a family has spent at the asylum office. Going back to Sarai's story, she arrived at the asylum office around 7 a.m. and didn't leave that day until 4:30 p.m. She reported that she didn't have any food throughout the entirety of her time there, nor did she have food for her child. And states that after leaving that interview, after being under what she experiences as interrogation for so many hours, she had the biggest headache, that she had a hard time even kind of talking at all after that interview concluded. I'll also share that when it comes to breaks, we have sometimes seen the asylum officers taking breaks. So the asylum officer might say, you know, please wait in the lobby and I'll come get you soon. But that kind of break doesn't give the family enough time to step outside and get food for their child, or to go downstairs and make a phone call or walk their child around outside, so they get a small little break. And as you can imagine, we've seen that childcare really impacts a family's ability to testify and participate in their interview. For the families that we've worked with during the interview themselves, their children have been a hot topic of conversation because they really had to figure out where their child could be while they were going to provide their testimony. We've seen families leave their kids with trusted adults, people that they knew and trusted, but people that their children had actually just met a few days ago. So neither the child nor the parent felt particularly good about the child being alone for 6 hours with that stranger in the lobby. We've also spoken with many parents who had their children in the interview with them because they felt they had no other option. And some parents have described their children as fidgeting or listening to everything that they were saying. One mother, in fact, I think the only mother we interviewed who said she wasn't worried about her child during the interview, reported that her child was sleeping most of the time. We also know of families who have left their children with an asylum officer in another room while they were participating in their interview. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, one of the things that we've seen is a need within the asylum office for additional training and guidance on how to best honor the rights of children in the expedited removal process. You know, in the world of unaccompanied kids, kids are not placed in expedited removal. So even though the asylum office has a lot of experience interviewing children, perhaps in front of the asylum office, it's in a very different procedure. And expedited removal raises unique rights and unique concerns for children who are going through the process. We have seen, for example, children who have been issued negative decisions, but who have never been given the opportunity, not a single time, to respond to a question about their fear of return to their country of origin. So with all of this information, I think I have 3 key takeaways. The first is that fairness in this process really requires that families have the opportunity to just sit down, take a breath, and have a moment before they participate in a life or death interview. We also think that the asylum office needs a little bit of time to better understand the unique realities that families and FERM face and to adjust policies and procedures accordingly to ensure that families have a real, meaningful, and fair shot in the process. We think a meaningful feedback loop from individuals who are working with families in this space, legal service providers, for example, can create a critical, high-impact, time-sensitive reporting mechanism to the government so that procedures can be adjusted accordingly. And lastly, what we found is that despite all of these odds and all of these challenges, we have resoundingly seen that every family that has called our hotline has gone to their interview, and if required to go to an immigration court hearing, has gone to that hearing as well, 100% of the time. And so with that, Cindy, I'll turn it back over to you. Cindy, I think you're still on mute.
Oh, there I am. I was just thanking you, Shay. So I appreciate your insight and your unique, both as a mother and as someone who's been on the ground in the family detention context for a very long time, sharing your insights on how the FERM process is now impacting families enrolled in it. So now I want to turn to Jovita. You and your team have been on the front lines of this issue, receiving calls from families at all stages in the process. Before I turn it over to you, I did want to just go over a quick snapshot of the work that you've done. Your team has been in touch with approximately 30 families that have called us kind of at all stages of the process, before their CFI, after their CFI, but before the decision, after receiving a negative. And you have been able to provide consultation to 14 families and accompany 12 of them to their credible fear interviews, and have provided representation for 4 families before an immigration judge in reviewing a negative credible fear determination. Some other statistics briefly: out of 27 families, 17 have come from the Arlington Asylum Office jurisdiction. Most of them were living in Baltimore. We've had 9 families calling from Newark, and we've been in touch with 1 family from Chicago. 12 out of 27 were from Honduras, with an additional representation from Ecuador, Peru, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Mexico. around 25 families, 20 of them were single mother heads of households, and 5 had dual head of households. And we think that's important to share based on, as Shay was mentioning, the need to focus on family. If you are in a dual head of household situation, there's a little more flexibility with, dad's going to watch the kids while mom thinks about, talks to the attorney, or, one of them is going to sit with the kids during the interview, and the other one will be with the asylum office. Doesn't obviate most of the challenges, but just something key to highlight there. The average age of a child enrolled in FERM is 6 years old, with the youngest having been 1 and the oldest being 15. Then next slide, a little bit about the legal consultation that you all have provided. You've been able to orient and consult with 14 families, and that's resulted in 6 positive decisions, 6 pending decisions, 1 rare language NTA, and 1 negative decision that was then vacated by the immigration judge. And on the converse, in speaking with 10 families who were not oriented or prepared by a legal assistant or attorney prior to their credible fear interview, there have also been 6 positive outcomes, and 4 negative outcomes, 2 of which were affirmed at IJ review with AIJ's representation, and 1 that was vacated. So a lot of really good work being done by a small but mighty staff on a very short timeline. So thank you, Jovita, for that. And I want to turn it over to you and kind of ask you, what are some of the trends that you're seeing in FERM in relation to accessing and providing legal services?
Yes, thank you, Cindy. So as mentioned before, the timeline in this process is pretty demanding and fast. So I'll go ahead and cover some of the trends we have been seeing with initial contact with us. So I believe we have the demographic, little visual there for you all. But just to summarize, we do get a bulk of our calls within even just a day or 2 before the credible fear interview. So, that in and of itself, requires some type of a game planning and be able to assist the families. I think most recently, one of the cases that stands out here, I'll call her Maria. She was able to contact us just the day before her credible fear interview. But going back to that timeline, the reasons behind why these families are contacting us with such a short notice is that, they aren't receiving our information until about day 5, maybe when they reach their ISAP appointment in their destination city. At that point, they are given our information. They do their best to contact us as soon as possible. And in this case with Maria, she seeking our assistance the day before her interview, midday, explaining that, she received our information, but then unfortunately, she's being required to travel from the Newark area all the way to the New York to, go to a consulate, obtained photographs and things of that nature. So I think that's some of the biggest trends we've been noticing, again, is that short time period that we have to work with clients. Again, if we're lucky, it's a day or 2, but in many cases as well, it could be a mere hours. And then there are some that unfortunately aren't able to get in contact with us before their credible fear interview. And, they'll contact us once their decision is pending. But even then, we advise them to let us know so that we could assist them and, do any type of advocacy that we can post-decision, whether that decision is negative so that we can assist them with the next steps, or even in cases where it's positive, we have some that might have questions about what is it that they can do at that point, what should they be doing? So again, even with these extremely limited windows where we have to, provide the best assistance that we can on in just mere hours. So there are even cases where even just advocacy alone and maybe not even representation are pretty helpful as well. But before I move into that, actually, even in regards to Maria, with that limited time in order to represent her, those few hours were very critical, especially because when she first contacted us, she doesn't, these families, a lot of times they don't understand how to differentiate us from all these other entities that they are in contact with. So it's also not just trying to work on these substantive issues, but also building rapport with these families so that they feel comfortable sharing their stories with us and feel comfortable, trusting us and trusting that we are here to help them. So in that case with Maria, it started out with general violence, and that is, an obstacle, especially because we need to help her be able to communicate her claim to the asylum officer in hopes that she is able to pursue her case. So in those few hours with her, again, it can be late night sometimes, but that was something very meaningful because from the beginning of the phone call to the end of the phone call, she was uncomfortable enough to share with us the reasons why she was fleeing Honduras. So again, that work, very critical, but it hasn't been easy, of course, especially even in that case, as mentioned previously as well. These are families that are coming to us. Some of these families are dual parent families. Many of them are single parent families. In most cases being that it's a single family household of a mother. So in Maria's case, again, they're speaking to us with mere hours to prepare, with no childcare, or at least childcare that's from a trusted individual where their children feel comfortable. So it's a matter of balancing our communication with them and their responsibilities with their families and how to provide childcare with their kids as well. So that has also been a unique challenge, but also some of the trends that we've been seeing. And so again, in a similar vein, so with some families where they contact us post credible fear interview, where we were not able to provide consultation about that process to them, many of those families actually have meritorious claims. So we've had some where unfortunately without our consultation, it did not come out with a positive decision, but with our advocacy at the IJ review stage, especially in one specific case where they were Quechua speakers, or actually they were a combination of Quechua and Spanish speakers, our advocacy and informing the court of their actual language, they were able to communicate to the immigration judge their claim, and just based on the substance alone, their decision was vacated. So advocacy just for accommodations or travel arrangements or other issues like with language has been very beneficial, even without direct representation. So again, wanting to close this section, again, there's a lot of human elements to this, and just balancing of, the timeline, the challenges the families are facing with their families, and having newly arrived to the US. So again, with that case, with the Indigenous family, I think that one, really highlights various aspects of this process of what the families are dealing with. So in that family, it was a husband and wife with a minor child that unfortunately, during their interview, they did their best. Actually, there's an excerpt here that's on the screen for you, where they did their best in advocating for themselves that they did not understand the process, that they wanted an attorney or needed a different language, but those, requests were ignored. But fortunately, they still pursued legal representation. They just didn't have enough time to contact us before their interview. They were able to make contact with us after their interview. And because of that, we were able to get involved at that stage and again, inform the court of the issues in their case. And with that alone, they were able to have that decision vacated, and now they're able to pursue their claim. And again, so, that ended up with a positive outcome on that one, but however, without legal advocacy, that likely would have turned out differently. So again, whether it's the direct representation or legal advocacy in some other way, it's been beneficial to speak to these clients at any juncture in this process. And Cindy, I will hand it over back to you.
Great, thank you. Jovita, for that insight. We are trucking along. I want to not waste too much time. We've got a lot of good questions coming in that we've been answering on the chat and also in the Q&A function as well. So I won't postpone anymore, and I will pass it on to Angela so she can provide us some more information regarding pro bono opportunities.
Thanks so much, Cindy. Hi, everyone. I'm Angela Buliaki-Sandronis, Director of the Pro Bono Program here at Americans for Immigrant Justice. I'm really excited to be with all of you here today. Whether you felt called to join us because you see the importance of keeping families together and out of detention, or you're moved by the principles of due process and access to counsel, or helping these families is important to you because of your personal immigration experience, maybe even a combination of all those reasons, we're happy to have you here and we need you. Our pro bono program is linked to all programs at Americans for Immigrant Justice. It identifies gaps in capacity to provide legal representation and serves as a link between those individuals in need of representation and volunteers looking to provide pro bono service. Our asylum project is housed within our pro bono program because the need for legal services for families enrolled in FERM is dependent on pro bono support. It does not matter if you have prior experience with asylum or not. What matters is caring about the families in this process and supporting them during this critical stage of their case involving extremely fast timelines of 6 to 12 days for the non-detained credible fear interview. And that interview is determinative of whether families can even apply for asylum. Our project does not pick between clients. We're set up to respond to the needs of families enrolled in FERM. And the idea is that this approach to legal services provision benefits families and safety overall. So here's the ask of those of you looking to join us in this world-shifting work supporting asylum-seeking families. We have opportunities to support our work in different ways. Volunteers can sign up to devote an entire week to helping us, traveling to be with us in Florida, where you would work with our team in person while providing services to FERM families remotely, or work with us virtually through the week. Volunteers can also sign up to devote 4 hours per week at a pre-scheduled day and time for 3 months. This could include in-person work in FERM destination cities, as well as remote work. We're also hoping to build longer-term partnerships and collaborations at the local level. If you're part of a nonprofit legal services organization that is interested in building capacity over time to receive direct referrals for FERM cases, we'd love to hear from you. Similarly, if you are a law firm, university, or other business interested in supporting your community to make a difference, please reach out. We're eager for partnerships in this space. Although we're specifically looking for Spanish speakers, we are also looking for a small cadre of devoted English speakers. We welcome your support and need it. This is an incredible opportunity to make a significant impact while providing targeted, limited scope, and much needed service to a large number of families. By volunteering different teams of staff per week over a month, partners could be involved in providing life-changing support to 1,125 families over the course of that month. So really, it's a huge impact. And volunteers don't need to be attorneys. Volunteers would receive orientation, they'd receive resources, as well as ongoing access to our team, providing robust support throughout the volunteering process. We also need organizations, and I wanted to flag this, who may be interested in assisting clients post-credible fear process, both on the legal services and social services side. And really, basically, if you have skills and are interested in helping others, we can find ways to get you involved. You know, we've seen the tremendous impact that having support can have in the rates of following through with the program. We also know the efficiencies that attorneys create. So think about Sarai's story that Shay shared at the beginning of today's webinar. You know, while not perfect, the FERM program is a positive step towards eliminating detention of immigrants. We want to show the truth that families do not want to abscond. They want to follow through in their process. but they need guidance navigating the system. And all of you willing to volunteer your time with us and for these families are the solution to making that happen. With that, we hope you would consider joining us. Please email supportasylum@aijustice.org if you have any questions about the pro bono volunteering process, want to learn more, or if you're ready to raise your hand to join us. And again, that email is supportasylum@aijustice.org, and the email address can be found on the slide on the screen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angela. I appreciate your contribution as well. What Jovita and Angela and Shay have all shared with us today is that, this new process for families is just starting. It's not a perfect process. It's not an ideal process. Expedited removal in and of itself is not something that I personally believe is legal in terms of the rights and obligations that states have in relation to asylum seekers, but in a world where family detention might be on the table, having seen firsthand the impacts that has on children and families, the FERM process, as Shay said, is a step in the right direction if it's a step away from potential detention of families. So I do want to flag before we move on to the Q&A, it looks like we've got a good 15 minutes here to chat about your questions, that we will be sharing out a report hopefully very shortly with additional trends, statistics, and recommendations that our team has seen through the first 6 weeks of providing services to families enrolled in FERM. We've got a number of questions here. On the screen, you'll also see that I've provided the information for the CLE information. If you are barred in Florida, this course does qualify for 1 CLE credit. So without further ado, let's dive into some of these questions. I think we've got a few that are mainly based on, again, clarifying the process. Hoping to turn to you, Shay, to maybe provide a little more clarification in relation to who is enrolled in FERM, if you're not going to a destination city versus if you indicate that you are, and a little more clarification on some of these things about, if you're not in a FERM city, what posture are families being placed in?
Sure, happy to try to unpack those questions. So just to kind of clarify for FERM, up until this moment, a family could be eligible for enrollment in the FERM program if they were issued orders of expedited removal, they claimed a fear of return to their country of origin, and therefore had the ability to have a credible fear interview. And they were headed to initially one of 4 select destination cities. So those initial destination cities were Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Newark, and Chicago. One of the things I'll say that's been really interesting about the calls that we have received is that the overwhelming majority of them have come from Baltimore, which makes us believe that the ISAP office, who we believe is distributing our contact information, has done a better job of other offices in making referrals. In fact, we did not receive a single phone call from a family in Washington, D.C. at any time in their proceeding, and we only received 1 phone call from a family in Chicago after they were issued a negative credible fear determination. Those 4 initial destination cities were expanded subsequently to include Minneapolis and Denver. And most recently, we have learned that the FERM program is now being expanded to New Orleans and also to Houston. And our understanding and expectation is that the growth of FERM will soon continue to grow and be nationwide. The speed of the growth, especially given our concerns about the lack of procedures to ensure that children and families have a fair shake in their credible fear interview process, is concerning to us. And so just wanted to give that additional context and background in relation to the cities, and in relation to the question about, what happens if someone is not headed to a particularly identified destination city where FERM enrollments are happening. So I can't speak globally, I can just speak to what we've seen. And so what we have seen through the hotline are exclusively families who have been enrolled in FERM. It is our understanding that if someone is not enrolled in FERM and they are a family unit, that they would be issued a notice to appear. And we have seen one case, the story that I referenced earlier today, in which a family was actually not living in a FERM destination city, but initially had thought they would be living in a FERM destination city. And that family, we believe, was unenrolled in the FERM process altogether and issued a notice to appear.
Thank you, Shay. So just a couple additional questions building off of that. The policy is supposed to apply only to nationals of countries in which ICE maintains regular removal flights. Do we have a comprehensive list of these countries? Go ahead, Shay.
No, I was going to say, I have not been given a comprehensive list of those countries. I do think that the countries where removal flights have generally been slow or limited, to my knowledge, well, there's a long list, but what we have seen what we have exclusively seen and FERM to date are families that are Spanish speaking or rare language indigenous language speakers who the government believed or thought could communicate in Spanish. And so just thinking through kind of those Spanish countries of origin that we understand there are limited removal flights to, we have not seen to date any families from Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, or Haiti, so none of those CHENVA countries. And we have not seen any families that speak another language other than Spanish or a rare language in a primarily Spanish-speaking country.
Mm-hmm. Some additional questions about the processing in relation to the ISAP appointments. Does ISAP allow attorneys or friends, family, clergy to accompany these families when they go to their first ISAP check-in?
I love this question, actually, because I think it's coming from the right place. We've been doing the best that we can. And for those of you who haven't worked with AI Justice's team, where we are sort of sprinkled around, I know that Cindy's located in Alaska, but our kind of headquarters or most of our staff are located in Miami, Florida. And so all of our legal services work has been virtual. And in some ways that's great, because we've really seen how difficult it is for families to get out of their home and to all of these different appointments. Transportation has been a real barrier and challenge for these families. Some of our families have reported having to pay $300, for example, to get to and from the Arlington Asylum Office from Baltimore. But the challenge of being virtual is that we aren't there in person. And so we have seen all sorts of bad things happen because no one's there in person. And we would love it if somebody was there in person. So just to give you some examples of that, we had one family who was waiting for hours in the asylum office, waiting to be called for their interview, until they realized hours later that they weren't actually in the asylum office at all. They were, we think, waiting in the lobby at the ISAP check-in office. And so to my knowledge, I'm not aware of reasons why, on the ground folks cannot accompany or be present in some of these spaces. And I think it's the right question. And we'd be thrilled to kind of talk with people at the local level who are interested in standing beside families in this way.
Great. In addition, some other questions about volunteers. This one's for you, Angela. What opportunity is there for volunteers from a law firm to volunteer but not take on representation?
Thanks so much for the question. So first and foremost, I want to highlight again that support asylum at aijustice.org email address. I would love to have the opportunity to directly connect with those of you who have questions about volunteering with us. And I think that's really the beauty about this opportunity, right? It's a great opportunity to get involved in a limited scope way, which can have high impact. So, one of the things I mentioned before is kind of the extent if a firm, for example, were to send volunteers weekly for an entire month, you're talking the opportunity to impact 1,125 families over the course of that month. So, it is, again, a limited scope opportunity, which also makes it great for looping in, non-attorneys as well within your firms, within your offices, within your law schools. So yes, please, if you have any questions, I'm happy to connect directly with you at supportasylum@aijustice.org.
Thank you, Angela. So there's a lot more questions here about kind of the process that folks are going through. This one, I think, Shay, maybe you could speak a little bit more about expedited removal kind of being a preliminary hurdle. The question here is, what happens if other forms of relief are identified, such as SIDGE eligibility, T or U visa?
Oh gosh, that's a great and hard question. And Cindy, I might try to layer in some answers to some of these others I see in the chat.
Great.
So I think we were trying to articulate just the lack of the luxury of time in helping families in this process. It has been pretty painful, actually, to, in such a short, condensed amount of time, ask families to kind of prepare for their interviews itself. So, talking about harm in home country, talking about the journey in Mexico, talking about experiences of trafficking. I do think that if the circumvention of lawful pathways asylum ban goes away, and we understand that that decision is being stayed, that was issued today pending appeal, but we do think that will make a difference. But the reason I kind of go back to that reality is that there is a lot that we think we've learned, perhaps nothing, mind-blowing, because it's sort of a lot of what we expected, but there is so much more that we haven't learned yet. So some of the things that we haven't learned, and this is responsive to some of Jennifer Whitlock's questions about ICE and some other questions that people have added just about kind of what is the experience of alternatives to detention? What is the experience of the ankle monitor for families? What kind of legal orientation, if any, is ICE giving? What does case management actually look like? Is it supportive? Is it punitive? Those are questions that we haven't even really been able to scratch the surface of, because we just have not had time to ask questions about anything other than helping people get ready for their case. And so that's really unfortunate. And I think that the answer to that question you posed, Cindy, about what about families who have T visa eligibility, who have U visa eligibility, we haven't been screening for those things, in part because we don't have time, and in part because we understand that in really every circumstance, once somebody has that order of expedited removal, that is their sole path forward. They have to obtain that positive credible fear determination in order to get to removal proceedings where they can raise other defenses to removal. There was this really amazing case that was like a long extended battle from Partners and Berks, where families who had been detained for more than 2 years tried to challenge their orders of expedited removal. And those initial challenges were unsuccessful until the children actually all had approved and pending I-360 petitions based upon their eligibility for special immigrant juvenile status. And at that juncture, they were able to wiggle their way out of their order of expedited removal and to proceed in adjusting their status. But that was like one very, very specific, unique case. And so despite other types of removal kind of defenses that somebody might have, the goal in the FERM program from a legal service provider perspective is to help somebody get out of that order of expedited removal by securing a positive decision of credible fear. And given the timeline, which is intended removal within 30 days, if families don't pass that hurdle, you don't really have time to do much else.
Thank you for that extra context. Answered quite a few of these questions. Just looking through, Jovita, perhaps you can answer this one kind of more about our services. How are families here learning about the hotline that we are operating?
Yes, so most report that they are learning about our hotline through our FERM flyer that's being provided to them at their ISAP check-in appointments, again, which is, I think, generally happening around like that day 5. So that's when they're receiving it. And from there, depending on what other errands and things that they're sent on have to do, they contact us soon thereafter.
And kind of similarly, are you seeing these interviews and these IJ reviews being conducted over the phone, or are they in person?
So all of our clients have attended their interviews and their IJ reviews in person.
Okay, great. All right. Shay, did you have something to add to that one?
There was a pro bono question actually that I wanted to circle back to. You know, I think we are feeling the desire to find creative ways to make access to legal services as accessible as possible to these families. And we're learning that there's not a lot of programmatic time to plan. You know, you get a call, you really have to start prepping that person as soon as you receive the call as possible. And so in kind of that spirit of wanting to find creative ways to bolster capacity to help these families, we've been thinking through different models of capacity building. And so there was a question from, I believe, a law firm, possible law firm partner on the call, sort of asking about like, how is there a way to help without entering an appearance? And so the answer to that question is yes. You know, one of the things and one of the pro bono models that we're leaning into is a model in which we as an agency would enter an appearance on a case, but the casework under our guidance and supervision would really be moved forward by our pro bono volunteer. The other thing that I'll say is that we really want to try to extend, you know, the kind of burdens of ushering cases forward as much as possible to other nonprofit partners who are wanting to kind of usher some cases in their local area. And that might look like, you know, taking one case a week as a nonprofit in a particular destination location. It might look like being kind of our volunteer where we enter a G28 and you're just providing some additional capacity to us. Or it might be that you, as an agency, receive direct case referrals that you place with your own pro bono network and mentor and kind of move forward, entering your own appearance in that case. I think there's also other models, right, where there might be no formal entry of an appearance, but where there are pro bonos who are providing meaningful consultation in partnership with nonprofit organizations that can guide and usher that kind of technical support. So we're really interested in talking with people who want to jump in really in any way into brainstorming ways that we can do so in partnership.
Thank you, Shay. So it looks like we're running short on time. I guess from what I've been seeing with these questions coming in both on the chat and the Q&As, there's still a lot of open questions that we also don't know the answers to. So this is a very new program that was announced along with an array of other programs that we're all also responding to all of these changes. We as an organization have really dove in to providing services, and we're trying to track and see what's really going on the ground. You know, right now FERM is in 6 cities. It's expanding to New Orleans and Houston this week, I believe, and we're expecting additional expansions to move pretty quickly. And just from our initial work in this field, you know, our gut reaction is we need to slow down. Families need to take a breath. That we need to reassess how this process is working. Are we really taking into consideration the needs of families and the specific situations that they're in? A lot of open questions about the orientation that they're being provided. What geographic scope are they in? You know, if they're on the outskirts of town, but they're technically within this AO jurisdiction, does that count? A lot of things that we're going to continue to learn as we continue this work, and we'll aim to continually share that out because we know that, you know, this information is really critical both in helping other organizations decide if they have the capacity to support this, if this is a policy that we're able to try and help shape in a way that really does provide meaningful access to services, or what the general response should be. We really do appreciate everyone coming in today to learn about this. It was a huge task to try to talk about this policy and what we're doing with it, and what our plans for the future are in an hour. I want to just give my panelists the opportunity to sum anything up if there's any last points that you'd like to make. And I'll go ahead and pass the mic back to our fearless leader, Shay, to maybe wrap it up.
I don't have any final points. I wish I could end in a really amazing call to action. I think just to say that you know, we are overwhelmingly worried about families going through the FERM process and overwhelmingly committed to finding a way to stand beside them, and equally under-resourced with this big kind of vision and goal. And so it's really a luxury to be able to spend some time with you this afternoon sharing what we're learning, and I look forward to many more conversations.
Great, and I've got a lot of calls for interest and following up. We'll be reaching out to folks that have expressed interest and following up with a post-webinar questionnaire and additional information on how to get involved. And we hope we've been able to share some great information with you. We'll also look forward to learning from you as this policy expands and as we grow this work together. So thank you all for your time today, and we wish you all a really good rest of your day.